Number 1. The dinosaurs that died by falling into a bigger dinosaur's footprint. The Shishugou Formation sits in the Yungar Basin of Xinjiang, northwestern China. The name means Stone Tree Valley, after the petrified logs scattered across the landscape. 160 million years ago, this was subtropical marshland bordered by active volcanoes. Today, it is arid Gobi Badlands. And buried within it, researchers found one of the strangest death traps in the fossil record. 3 bone beds preserve vertically stacked articulated skeletons of at least 18 small theropod dinosaurs in pits 1 to 2 meters deep, filled with deformed volcanic mudstone and sandstone. These were not natural depressions. They were localized areas of liquefaction caused by large dinosaur trampling of saturated, ash-covered sediments. The leading candidate for the tramplers is Mamenchosaurus, a 20-meter-long, roughly 20-ton sauropod found nearby. The mechanism works like this. Volcanic eruptions showered the area with massive ash, creating a semi-solid surface over pockets of quicksand-like volcanic mud. When Mamenchosaurus walked across, its feet punched through and the footprints backfilled with thick mud. The result was invisible traps indistinguishable from solid ground. Small theropods at 40 to 50 pounds could walk unhindered across the ash crust, but became instantly trapped upon stumbling into the mud-filled footprints. Bipedal theropods had a particularly difficult time escaping. Quadrupeds had what researcher David Eberth described as natural four-wheel drive to pull themselves out. These small theropods were likely feathered, and mud-soaked feathers would have weighed them down further. Their own insulation became an anchor. Limosaurus inextricabilis dominates the assemblage with a minimum of 15 individuals. Its species name literally means unable to be freed, named after the manner of its death. One pit contained a crocodilian pressed against a small ceratosaur. Another held 3 decapitated ceratosaurs. But the most significant pit yielded Guanlong wukaisi, a tyrannosauroid weighing 80 to 125 kilograms with a dramatic cranial crest. Guanlong measured 3 to 3.5 meters long. The name means crowned dragon, with the species name multicolored for the banded badlands where it was found. It dates to 160 million years ago, 92 million years before Tyrannosaurus. 2 known Guanlong specimens died in the same trap. Histological analysis confirmed their ages. The 6-year-old juvenile died first and was likely trampled by the 12-year-old adult that arrived later. The predator-lure dynamic is textbook. The larger Guanlong was attracted by seemingly easy prey stuck in the mud, then became ensnared itself. This mirrors the La Brea tar pits model, where predators are disproportionately trapped because they are drawn to struggling victims. The fossils were stacked vertically, one carcass atop another. This is a nearly unique taphonomic arrangement confirming successive individual deaths rather than a single mass kill event. High-quality skeletal preservation with complete articulation suggests individuals were buried within days to months of death. The pit had a kill threshold. After enough bodies accumulated, subsequent animals could potentially stand on the piled corpses and escape. The trap had to fill with dead before it stopped killing. The findings were published in 2010 in PalaiOS by David A. Eberth of the Royal Tyrrell Museum in Alberta, Xu Xing of the IVPP in Beijing, and James M. Clark of George Washington University. Excavations since 2000 filled a gap in a period previously notorious for its lack of dinosaur fossils, roughly 165 to 155 million years ago. As a side note, the Shishugou Badlands were used for sequences in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. The Ceratopsian Yinlong, meaning hidden dragon, found at the site was literally named after the film. The mainstream theory, volcanic ash over saturated ground created localized liquefaction traps activated by sauropod trampling with successive victims drawn by struggling prey in a La Brea-style predator lure. The historical interpretation suggests these traps persisted seasonally, possibly during wet periods when ash became saturated, creating a recurring mortality pattern rather than a single catastrophic event. The speculative position questions whether the pits were truly sauropod footprints rather than other geological features like treefall holes or dissolution pits, though the shape, depth, and association with trampled sediment strongly favor the footprint interpretation. One of the earliest known members of the Tyrannosaur lineage, the evolutionary forerunner of the greatest predator dynasty in Earth's history, killed by walking into a puddle it couldn't get out of. But at least those deaths were one at a time. The next entry involves an entire herd that ran full speed into a trap none of them could see. Number 2, the Gallimimus herd that ran straight into mud. Gallimimus bulletus was one of the fastest dinosaurs that ever lived. 6 meters long, around 440 kilograms, bipedal, built like a sprinting machine. Biomechanical estimates put its top speed somewhere between 40 and 56 kilometers per hour. The name means chicken mimic. It was a large ornithomimid theropod from the late Cretaceous of Mongolia, roughly 70 million years ago. And a whole herd of them died standing still. The Nemeg Formation of the Gobi Desert is one of the most productive geological units in paleontology. It preserves an exceptional late Cretaceous ecosystem of rivers, floodplains, and seasonal lakes. Within this formation, researchers found a bone bed containing multiple Gallimimus individuals of varying ages. That mix of juveniles and adults is one of the strongest pieces of evidence we have for herding behavior in theropods. But the site tells a darker story than social bonding. Sedimentology at the site points to a mudflat or shallow lake margin. The sediment was wet enough and deep enough to immobilize legs, but not deep enough to look obviously dangerous. Gallimimus' feet were relatively narrow and unadapted for soft ground. Compare that to Hadrosaurs, which had broader, padded feet suited for wet terrain. Gallimimus was built for firm substrate, and firm substrate is exactly what this wasn't. What likely happened follows a pattern we still see today. Once one animal became stuck, others stampeded into the same trap. Panic cascade behavior is well documented in modern wildebeest and caribou near rivers and bogs. The taphonomic analysis backs this up. The skeletons are largely articulated, meaning the animals didn't thrash free. They were stuck fast and died in place. The mud sealed around them, and a sediment covered the bodies before scavengers could scatter bones. These were likely omnivores with beak-like jaws suited for plants, small animals, and insects. They weren't chasing prey into the mud. They were running blind. And the terrain itself was deceptive. Seasonal rains could shift ground from firm to lethally soft without any visible warning. Think of it as a hidden trap in an otherwise navigable landscape. You might compare this to the La Brea tar pits or the Cleveland Lloyd dinosaur quarry, where predators got stuck chasing already trapped prey. But the Gallimimus bone bed has no evidence of a predator lure. These animals ran into death on their own. And here's the part that baffles researchers. Gallimimus had large eyes and a relatively large brain for a dinosaur. Decent sensory awareness, yet collectively, they face-planted into mud. The original holotype was described by Osmolska, Roniewicz, and Barsbold in 1972 during the Polish-Mongolian paleontological expeditions. The famous Jurassic Park flocking scene was directly inspired by this herding evidence, though the film swapped out death by mud for a T-Rex chase. More cinematic, less humiliating. Modern elephants get stuck in African mud wallows, and rescue efforts sometimes fail even with human intervention. That gives you a sense of how lethal soft ground is for heavy animals. Death by miring is actually one of the most common taphonomic scenarios in the fossil record, but a whole herd going down together is rare. The mainstream theory is straightforward: environmental trap during seasonal rains. A historical interpretation suggests drought-driven congregation at a shrinking water source may have increased density near dangerous substrate. And on the speculative fringe, some have proposed that volcanic or seismic activity could have liquefied otherwise stable ground rapidly. Whatever the mechanism, the result is the same. An animal literally built to be one of the fastest things on two legs killed by standing still in the wrong spot. And that collective failure raises a question. What happens when predators converge on a kill and turn on each other instead? Number 3. The Deinonychus pack that killed each other over a Tenontosaurus. The Cloverleaf Formation of Montana preserves early Cretaceous ecosystems from roughly 115 to 108 million years ago. This is the site that launched the dinosaur renaissance. In 1969, John Ostrom described Deinonychus antiropus here, and the discovery single-handedly ignited the idea that dinosaurs were active, warm-blooded animals. Adult Deinonychus measured about 3.4 meters long and weighed roughly 73 kilograms. Each foot carried a 12-centimeter hyperextensible sickle claw. The prey animal at several of these sites was Tenontosaurus tilleti, a medium-sized ornithopod between 6.5 and 8 meters long, weighing up to 1 to 2 tons, significantly larger than any individual Deinonychus. At multiple cloverleaf formation sites, researchers found 4 to 6 Deinonychus individuals in association with single Tenontosaurus carcasses. The original interpretation was cooperative pack hunting like wolves. That narrative dominated popular science for decades and shaped our entire cultural imagination of raptors. Then, in 2007, Brian Roach and Daniel Brinkman dismantled it. Their taphonomic analysis found something unexpected. Deinonychus specimens at these sites showed tooth marks from other Deinonychus. They were biting and injuring each other at the kill site. The revised interpretation, Deinonychus mobbed the Tenontosaurus individually or in loose aggregations, then fought savagely over carcass access. Not wolves. Komodo dragons. Modern Komodo dragon feeding is the closest living analog. Multiple individuals converge on prey, inflict wounds, then fight over the body, sometimes killing each other in the process. The parallel is almost exact, and the Tenontosaurus was far from defenseless. A tail swiper kick from a 1-ton ornithopod could easily kill or maim a 73-kilogram predator. Some Deinonychus specimens at these sites are juveniles and subadults, suggesting inexperienced animals got themselves killed in chaotic melees. Denver Fowler and colleagues proposed the raptor prey restraint model in 2011. The sickle claw functioned as a grappling hook to pin prey while jaws did the killing, based on comparison with modern hawks and eagles. The claw was a tool for individual use, not coordinated assault. Tooth marks on Deinonychus bones show patterns consistent with combat between living animals, not post-mortem scavenging. The Cloverleaf environment was a semi-arid floodplain with seasonal water. Patchy resources drive competitive rather than cooperative behavior. The death toll at some sites suggests the Tenontosaurus may have killed or mortally wounded several Deinonychus before going down itself. A Pyrrhic victory for everyone involved. The mainstream theory now holds that this was competitive mob feeding, with Deinonychus fighting each other over carcass access. A historical interpretation allows for loose cooperative mobbing with no true strategy, where individuals incidentally benefited from others' attacks. And the fringe position argues true pack hunting did occur in some populations, with the combat evidence reflecting occasional breakdowns in social hierarchy rather than the norm. Nobody cooperated, nobody strategized, and multiple animals died fighting over meat that none of them ended up eating in peace. But dying over food is at least comprehensible. The next animal was killed by something far more poignant: being a good parent. Number 4. The Oviraptor who died sitting on its nest. Oviraptor Velociraptor was named by Henry Fairfield Osborn in 1924 from the Geological formation of Mongolia. The name means egg Caesar, lover of ceratopsians. It is one of the most slanderous names in taxonomic history. Osborn gave it that name because the holotype was found atop eggs he assumed belonged to Protoceratops, the most common dinosaur at the site. For 70 years, Oviraptor appeared in books and museums as a sneaky egg thief, an entire public reputation built on a misidentification. In 1993, Mark Norell and colleagues at the American Museum of Natural History found an identical egg with an Oviraptorosaur embryo inside, not Protoceratops. The original Oviraptor was not stealing eggs. It was sitting on its own nest, brooding as a parent. Subsequent discoveries in the 1990s and 2000s found multiple Oviraptorosaur specimens in brooding postures directly on nests, arms spread over eggs in arrangements identical to modern ground nesting birds. The Geological formation is dominated by Aeolian sandstone, an arid, dune-dominated environment where sandstorms were a regular lethal hazard. The brooding posture is remarkably consistent across specimens: legs folded beneath the body, arms extended symmetrically over the egg ring, head tucked to one side. Eggs were arranged in concentric rings with the animal sitting in the center, maximizing contact between parent and eggs for heat transfer. This is functionally identical to ostriches and emus today. The speed of burial by sand was fast enough to preserve the posture, but slow enough that the animal chose to stay rather than flee. It prioritized eggs over its own survival. Oviraptorosaurs had toothless beaks, cranial crests, and were likely feathered. They looked more like large, strange birds than the lizard-like thieves of old paleo art. Under ICZN rules, once a taxonomic name is established, it sticks regardless of how wrong the original interpretation was. Oviraptor is permanently slandered. Nests typically contain 20 or more eggs, representing a massive reproductive investment. Abandoning the nest meant losing an entire clutch. The feathered arms likely served a dual function, insulating eggs and shading them from desert sun, similar to modern ground nesting birds in arid environments. The Geological formation has yielded some of the most spectacular fossils ever found, including the fighting dinosaur specimen, thanks to rapid sand burial preserving life poses. The mainstream theory, devoted parent caught in a sandstorm while brooding. The historical interpretation notes that the frequency of brooding posture specimens suggests these nesting sites were particularly vulnerable to sand burial events, meaning the environment itself was a reproductive trap. And the speculative angle. Some researchers have questioned whether all brooding specimens represent maternal care. Males in some bird species brood exclusively, and these Oviraptor specimens could represent male-only parental investment, which would reshape our understanding of dinosaur reproductive roles. Killed by devoted parenting, then slandered as a criminal for nearly a century, vindicated by the very science that accused it. That's tragedy on a geological timescale. But the next death is less noble and more visceral. It involves a predator whose eyes were bigger than its esophagus. Number 5, the dinosaur that choked on its lunch. Compsognathus longips comes from the Solnhofen limestone of Bavaria, Germany, late Jurassic, approximately 150 million years ago. It was tiny. About 1 meter long, roughly 2 to 3 kilograms, one of the smallest known non-avian dinosaurs at the time of its discovery. The Solnhofen limestone is a Lagerstätte, a geological deposit with exceptional preservation. This is the same formation that produced Archaeopteryx. Fine-grained lithographic limestone preserved not just bones, but gut contents, soft tissue impressions, and, crucially, the last meal. Inside the body cavity of Compsognathus, researchers found the remains of a small lizard, Bavarisaurus macrodactylus, swallowed more or less whole. Gulp-and-go predation. No chewing capability whatsoever. Whether the lizard directly caused death by choking is debated. Some researchers believe the animal died from another cause shortly after eating, with the meal preserved in situ. But the position of the lizard remains high in the digestive tract in some interpretations. It hadn't progressed far through digestion, which is consistent with choking or obstruction. Modern analogs are everywhere. Snakes, monitor lizards, and predatory birds frequently die attempting to swallow prey that is too large or lodges in the throat. Compsognathus had small, sharp teeth, suited for grabbing prey, but no capacity for dismembering food. If prey was slightly too large, the only option was to try harder. The Solnhofen environment consisted of shallow lagoons surrounded by arid islands where Compsognathus hunted lizards, insects, and small animals. Johann Andreas Wagner first described the species in 1859. It was one of the first small theropods known and played a critical role in early debates about dinosaur biology. So small and bird-like that early researchers questioned whether it was even a dinosaur. John Ostrom confirmed the lizard identification in 1978 and noted the remarkable preservation. Stomach contents are rare in the fossil record. Finding identifiable prey inside a predator is a paleontological jackpot that reveals diet directly rather than through inference. Other dinosaurs with preserved gut contents include Sinocalliopteryx, which had a Confuciusornis leg inside it, and Microraptor, which contained fish and bird remains. The prey-to-predator size ratio was aggressive. Bavarisaurus was a substantial fraction of Compsognathus's body length. In modern terms, think of a human trying to swallow a watermelon. The mainstream theory holds that death came from an unrelated cause, likely drowning or exposure, shortly after feeding, with the meal preserved coincidentally. The historical interpretation notes the high position of the prey in the digestive tract and the lagoon edge location, suggesting the animal struggled after eating and collapsed into the water. And the speculative theory proposes the lizard may have been alive when swallowed and caused internal damage during struggles, a phenomenon documented in modern reptilian predators. Eyes bigger than your esophagus, preserved in limestone for 150 million years. But if dying with your lunch stuck in your throat is embarrassing, the next entry involves two animals that died locked in combat. simultaneously killing each other and then getting buried alive. Number 6. The Velociraptor versus Protoceratops, locked in eternal combat. The fighting dinosaur specimen was discovered in 1971 by a Polish-Mongolian expedition at Tugrikan-Shiri, Geological Formation, Mongolia. Late Cretaceous, approximately 74 to 71 million years ago. It is the most famous death scene in paleontology. Velociraptor mongoliensis was roughly 2 meters long and weighed 15 to 20 kilograms, far smaller than Jurassic Park depicted, about the size of a turkey with a long tail. Protoceratops andrewsi was sheep-sized, roughly 1.8 meters long, about 80 to 180 kilograms, significantly heavier. The forensic reading of the specimen is extraordinary. The Velociraptor's left sickle claw is embedded in the throat region of the Protoceratops, likely targeting the carotid artery or trachea. The Protoceratops has the Velociraptor's right forearm clamped in its beak, a beak powerful enough to crush bone, adapted for shearing tough vegetation. The Velociraptor's arm shows clear breakage at the point of the bite. The Protoceratops was actively shattering it at the moment of burial. The killing agent was almost certainly a sudden sand dune collapse or sandstorm burial. Geological, Aeolian sandstone records frequent dune migration events. The speed of burial was fast enough that neither animal could disengage, locked in combat, frozen mid-struggle. Some researchers, including Mark Barsbold, initially questioned whether this was coincidental association, but the interlocking postures make chance juxtaposition virtually impossible. The specimen is a Mongolian national treasure, housed at the Mongolian Paleontological Center in Ulaanbaatar. It has only left the country a handful of times for exhibition. The fight may have been predatory, Velociraptor attacking for food, or defensive, perhaps near a nest. Protoceratops is the most common dinosaur in the Geological Formation, and some researchers suggest Velociraptor regularly hunted them despite the size disadvantage. Velociraptor was almost certainly feathered. Quill knobs were found on the forearm of specimen IOGM100/981 in 2007 by Alan Turner and colleagues, providing direct anatomical evidence. The combat posture shows Velociraptor on its side with the legs extended toward Protoceratops, consistent with a kick-and-hold attack strategy. Both animals were likely already injured and weakened by the time the sand hit. The Protoceratops may have been winning before geology intervened. The mainstream theory, active predation attempt interrupted by sudden dune collapse, both animals too engaged to flee. The historical interpretation suggests the fight may have been prolonged, with the dune collapse occurring during an already weakening struggle, both near death regardless. The speculative theory proposes the Velociraptor may have been scavenging or harassing an already injured Protoceratops, with the dramatic battle narrative being somewhat romanticized. Two animals locked in mortal combat, each probably moments from killing the other, and a sand dune buries them both. But at least they only died once. The next animal had to survive being eaten and then face the same predator again. Number 7. The Hadrosaur that got eaten alive twice. The key specimen is a partial Edmontosaurus tail showing healed bite marks matching Tyrannosaurus rex tooth dimensions. This is direct evidence of a survived predatory attack. Edmontosaurus annectens was a large late Cretaceous hadrosaur, up to 12 meters long and over 4 tons. Big but defenseless aside from size, herding, and running ability. The healed bite marks are visible as irregular bone remodeling on tail vertebrae and chevrons. Bone grew back lumpy and thickened around the injury site. The healing followed the same biological process seen in modern reptiles and birds. Inflammation, callus formation, and remodeling over weeks to months. For bone to have healed to the observed degree, the animal survived at minimum several weeks, possibly months. It escaped and lived. T-Rex bite force has been estimated at up to 57,000 newtons, roughly 12,800 pounds force. The strongest bite of any terrestrial animal ever measured. Surviving even a glancing T-Rex bite to the tail is remarkable. The most likely scenario is that the Edmontosaurus was bitten during a chase, and the predator lost its grip. Hadrosaur tails were thick, muscular, and supported by robust tendons, providing natural armor against incomplete bites. Then comes the second chapter. A second set of bite marks on the same or closely associated specimens showed no healing. The animal was bitten again and did not survive. This two-attack narrative makes the specimen one of the most dramatic survivor stories in the fossil record, and one of the most unlucky. From the Hell Creek Formation of Montana and the Dakotas, This represents the last 1 to 2 million years of the Cretaceous. T-Rex and Edmontosaurus were contemporaries right up to the asteroid. Paleopathologist Bruce Rothschild cataloged hundreds of healed injuries in Hadrosaur bones. Attack survival was not uncommon. These animals were tough. The ratio of healed versus unhealed T-Rex bite marks suggests a predator success rate possibly as low as 20 to 50% per attack, comparable to modern lions at 25 to 30%. Hadrosaurs relied on early detection, herding, and sustained running to escape, not fighting back. Some researchers propose T-Rex preferentially targeted the tail and hindquarters during a chase, similar to how lions target the haunches of fleeing prey. And critically, the healed bite invalidates the T-Rex scavenger hypothesis entirely. You do not get bitten on the tail by a scavenger while alive and running. The mainstream theory: standard predator-prey interaction with a failed first attack and a successful second. The historical interpretation suggests the frequency of healed bite marks across hadrosaur populations means T-Rex attacks were regular ecological events, not rare encounters, with hadrosaurs evolving to be tough enough to survive one bite. The speculative counterpoint proposes the healed bites could represent territorial combat with other large theropods, and that the tooth size match to T-Rex may be less definitive than assumed. Survive the unsurvivable, heal, return to the herd, live with a massive scar and a limp, then have the nightmare come back and finish the job. But while Edmontosaurus faced its predator, the next animal faced something it could not fight: the weather. Number 8. The Citipati buried in a sandstorm. Arms spread over its eggs. Citipati osmolsky is an Oviraptorosaur from the Geological formation, closely related to Oviraptor but larger and better represented by brooding specimens. The name means funeral pyre lord, from a Tibetan Buddhist deity, unintentionally appropriate for an animal preserved in its death pose. The most famous specimen, IGM 100/979, was described by James Clark, Mark Norell, and Rinchen Barsbold in 1999. It is preserved in symmetrical brooding posture, legs folded beneath the body, both arms extended outward and backward over the egg ring, head tucked to the right. The posture is virtually identical to modern ostriches and ground nesting birds. At least 22 elongated eggs are arranged in a circular pattern, paired in a ring with long axes pointing outward from the center, each roughly 18 centimeters long. Adults measured about 2.5 to 3 meters long, with a distinctive tall cask-like head crest. The arms were feathered based on phylogenetic bracketing and direct evidence from related Oviraptorosaurs. This is a critical detail. The brooding posture only makes functional sense with feathers. Without them, spreading arms over eggs would be pointless. Bare skin and bone would not provide insulation. This makes the fossil indirect evidence of feathering from behavior alone before you even look at the skeletal anatomy. The burial agent was a catastrophic sandstorm or dune collapse, consistent with other Geological specimens preserved in life positions. Sand accumulation suggests the animal was alive as conditions worsened. It did not flee, it stayed on the nest. This behavior is documented in modern birds. Ground nesting species will die on the nest rather than abandon eggs. Some nests show evidence of partial hatching, meaning the parent may have been brooding eggs at different developmental stages. A long-term commitment. The Geological formation has yielded at least 6 Oviraptorosaur on-nest specimens. That is one of the most replicated behavioral observations in the entire dinosaur fossil record. The nesting sites appear to have been in open, exposed areas with good drainage, making them especially vulnerable to sandstorms and dune migration. The Cretaceous goby had hot days and cold nights. Brooding was necessary to maintain stable egg temperatures, not optional. Comparison with Troodon nesting sites in Montana shows a different strategy. Troodon may have partially buried eggs with less direct brooding, suggesting diverse parenting strategies existed among theropods. This is an evolutionary gradient worth noting. Different lineages solve the same problem in different ways. The mainstream theory: standard parental brooding interrupted by sudden sand burial, with the parents' refusal to flee reflecting deep nesting instinct. The historical interpretation suggests the concentration of brooding specimens in the Geological means these nesting grounds were ecological traps, good for egg laying but lethal during storm season. The speculative position holds that the symmetrical postures may partially reflect post-mortem positioning by settling sand, though this remains a minority view given consistency across multiple specimens. A parent that chose to die protecting its young preserved in that act for 75 million years. But the next story is less about devotion and more about what happens when scientists see what they want to see. Number 9. The Thescelosaurus. With a fossilized heart? Maybe. The specimen nicknamed Willo is a remarkably complete Thescelosaurus neglectus from the Hell Creek Formation of South Dakota, discovered in 1993. Thescelosaurus was a small to medium ornithischian, about 3.5 to 4 meters long, roughly 200 to 300 kilograms, living at 66 million years ago, the very end of the Cretaceous. Willo was collected by amateur fossil hunter Mike Hammer on a private ranch, later acquired by the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. In 2000, Andrew Kuzmitz, Dale Russell, and Timothy Fisher published a paper in Science claiming that CT scans revealed a three-dimensionally preserved four-chambered heart within the chest cavity. The scans appeared to show internal chambers, an aorta, and recognizable cardiac anatomy. If true, it would be the first direct evidence of dinosaur heart structure. The implications were enormous. A four-chambered heart supports endothermy, warm-bloodedness, because four chambers are more efficient for high metabolic rates. Media attention was massive. Headlines declared a dinosaur heart had been found. Willo became briefly famous worldwide. The challenge came almost immediately. Other paleontologists argued the structure was a siderite concretion, an iron carbonate mass. Timothy Cleland and colleagues published a rebuttal showing that ironite concretions commonly form within body cavities during fossilization and can mimic organ shapes with surprising accuracy. The debate became a case study in interpreting soft tissue preservation. What looks like biology can be pure geology. Regardless of the heart controversy, Willo is exceptionally well preserved with an articulated skeleton, possible tendon impressions, and detailed bone surface textures. The Allosaurus was one of the last non-avian dinosaurs alive before the KPG extinction, found in the uppermost layers of Hell Creek. The name means wonderful lizard, given by Charles W. Gilmore in 1913, who was impressed by specimen completeness despite the animal being otherwise unremarkable. The broader issue is methodological. Extraordinary claims about soft tissue preservation require extraordinary evidence, and CT scanning can be ambiguous. Other soft tissue claims, particularly Mary Schweitzer's T-Rex blood vessels and proteins, have been similarly controversial but have held up better to scrutiny over time. The mainstream theory, the heart, is a siderite concretion that formed naturally inside the chest cavity during fossilization, mimicking organ morphology. The historical interpretation suggests that even if it is not a heart, the concretion's position and shape may preserve information about the chest cavity's original contents and could guide future soft tissue research. The speculative theory proposes the original heart interpretation may be partially correct. The concretion could have nucleated around actual degraded cardiac tissue, preserving a mineral ghost of the organ rather than the organ itself. Willo remains on display at the North Carolina Museum with appropriate caveats. Died in a flood, got preserved so well that scientists argued for over 20 years about whether a rock inside it was its heart. The answer is probably just a rock. But that debate is a minor academic disagreement compared to what comes next: the death of an entire world. Number 10. The entire species killed by a rock from space. The Chicxulub impactor struck the Yucatan Peninsula approximately 66.043 million years ago, marking the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary. The asteroid was estimated at 10 to 15 kilometers in diameter, roughly the size of San Francisco or the base of Mount Everest. Impact velocity was approximately 20 kilometers per second, 72,000 kilometers per hour, releasing energy estimated at 100 teratoons of TNT. That is roughly 10 billion times the Hiroshima bomb. The Chicxulub crater measures about 180 kilometers in diameter and was 20 kilometers deep before infilling. It was not identified until 1978 when geophysicists Glenn Penfield and Antonio Camargo, working for Mexican oil company Pemex, noticed a gravitational anomaly under the jungle and seafloor. The extinction had been hiding beneath the Yucatan for decades. The kill chain was systematic. Impact generated mega tsunamis estimated at over 100 meters in height, scouring coastlines across the Gulf of Mexico and Atlantic. Ejecta, heated to thousands of degrees, re-entered the atmosphere globally, causing an infrared heat pulse that may have ignited widespread wildfires across entire continents within hours. The heat pulse alone may have killed most exposed land animals in the first few hours. Anything not underground, underwater, or sheltered was likely incinerated. Then came impact winter. Dust and aerosols, particularly sulfur from vaporized anhydrite rock, blocked sunlight for months to years, collapsing photosynthesis. Global temperatures may have dropped 10 to 20 degrees Celsius. Cold-blooded animals were devastated. Food chains disintegrated from the base up. Ocean acidification from sulfuric acid rain decimated marine ecosystems. Ammonites, many bivalves, and planktonic foraminiferae were wiped out. Approximately 75% of all species went extinct, all non-avian dinosaurs, all pterosaurs, most marine reptiles, all ammonites. The survivors were generally small, generalist, burrowing, aquatic, or otherwise able to shelter from the initial devastation and subsist on detritus during years of darkness. Birds survived as the only living dinosaur lineage. Small size, flight capability, and seed and insect diets helped. Mammals survived largely as small, nocturnal, burrowing insectivores, which set the stage for the explosive Paleocene diversification that eventually produced us. Dinosaurs had dominated terrestrial ecosystems for over 160 million years across the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous, the longest reign of any major vertebrate group. And it is worth noting the evolutionary prelude. The Deccan Traps volcanic eruptions in India were already stressing ecosystems before impact. The asteroid may have been the final blow to an already weakened biosphere. In 2016, IODP Expedition 364 drilled into the crater's peak ring, revealing rock shattered to over 10 kilometers depth and enough vaporized sulfur to cause a decade-long winter. The connection between impact and extinction was not proposed until the Alvarez team's 1980 paper, more than a century after the KPG boundary was first recognized. The mainstream theory, the asteroid was the primary extinction driver, with the Deccan Traps as a contributing stressor. The historical interpretation argues the Deccan Traps were already causing significant extinctions, and the asteroid merely accelerated an ongoing collapse. The speculative fringe includes proposals that the impact's timing was cosmically coincidental, that volcanism alone would have eventually caused comparable extinction, and that periodicity in extinction events may be linked to galactic orbital cycles. 160 million years of evolution, adaptation, and dominance ended in a single afternoon by an object hurtling through space with zero malice and zero aim. That is the ultimate stupid death, multiplied by every non-avian dinosaur species that ever existed. But how do we actually know all of this? The answer lies in the science of preservation itself, the taphonomy of stupidity. How dumb deaths get preserved. Taphonomy is the study of how organisms decay, become preserved, and enter the fossil record. The term was coined by Ivan Efremov in 1940, and it contains a fundamental insight that reframes everything we have discussed so far. The fossil record is not a random sample of life. It is biased towards sudden, catastrophic deaths in depositional environments: mud, sand, anoxic water. Quiet deaths, disease, old age in open terrain, rarely preserve. Scavengers, weather, and decomposition destroy remains before burial can occur. The stupidest deaths are often the best preserved precisely because the death agent is also the preservation agent. Mud kills and entombs. Sand buries and seals. Lagoon water drowns and pickles. Articulated skeletons where bones remain in life position require rapid burial. The animal died where it was trapped, not where it was carried. Gut contents like the Compsognathus lizard require anoxic conditions within hours of death to prevent internal bacterial digestion from destroying the evidence. Brooding postures require burial fast enough to freeze the pose, but gentle enough not to scatter the skeleton. Aeolian sand is ideal for this. The fighting dinosaur specimen required near instantaneous burial of two interlocked animals, an event so specific that only dune collapse in an arid formation could produce it. Lagerstätten, like the Solnhofen limestone, are rare geological windows. They disproportionately represent certain environments and death types. The Hell Creek Formation preserves the final chapter of dinosaur history partly because it was a river-dominated floodplain ideal for rapid sediment burial. Bone healing, as we saw in the Edmontosaurus, is readable through paleopathology. Callus formation, remodeling patterns, and infection markers tell stories of injuries survived and re-encountered. CT scanning technology has revolutionized taphonomic analysis since the 1990s, allowing researchers to see internal structures without destroying specimens. And siderite concretions, like the Willo-Hart debate, demonstrate how geology can mimic biology. A recurring problem, here's the survivorship bias that underlies this entire documentary. We see the Gallimimus herd that got stuck, not the thousands that crossed safely. The fossil record selects for failure, the mainstream theory. Taphonomic bias explains why dramatic deaths dominate the fossil record, because they are inherently more preservable. The historical interpretation suggests some environments were systematically deadly in ways that also systematically preserved evidence. The speculative position holds that the bias may be so extreme that our understanding of dinosaur behavior is skewed almost entirely toward atypical events. Normal dinosaur life may be essentially unrecoverable. We only know about these deaths because stupidity and preservation go hand in hand. But there is a deeper pattern beneath these individual catastrophes. The evolutionary logic that made each one possible. Every death in this documentary traces back to an adaptation that worked most of the time, but failed catastrophically at the edges. Evolutionary arms races built offensive weapons and defensive counters simultaneously. T-Rex jaws versus Hadrosaur herding. Deinonychus claws versus Protoceratops beaks. Each escalation produced a counter-escalation. T-Rex's size was its greatest weapon and its greatest vulnerability. 57,000 newtons of bite force came at the cost of fall survivability. Hutchinson's 2007 model showed the animal could not allocate enough muscle to both speed and stability. Deinonychus's sickle claw evolved for individual prey restraint, not cooperative hunting. Game theory explains why. When any individual can defect and steal food, cooperation is not a stable strategy. Hadrosaurs evolved survival by numbers. A 20 to 50% predator success rate means the herd survives even as individuals fall. Gallimimus traded foot breadth for speed, and the trade killed them on soft ground. Every adaptation is a bet placed against a specific environment. These bets were not always read correctly. Oviraptor was slandered as an egg thief for 70 years based on Osborne's 1924 misidentification. Deinonychus was romanticized as a wolf-style pack hunter from 1969 until Roach and Brinkman's 2007 reanalysis revealed competitive mob feeding. Jack Horner's T-Rex scavenger hypothesis was contradicted by healed bite marks on living Edmontosaurus. The Chicxulub crater hid under the Yucatan until 1978. Cultural biases shaped each error. Egg-stealing fit villain narratives. Pack hunting seemed sophisticated. The dinosaur renaissance overcorrected by imposing mammalian social models on reptilian lineages. Each correction followed the same arc. Cultural assumption, decades of reinforcement, new taphonomic or embryological evidence, paradigm shift. The field self-corrects, but wrong ideas can persist 40 to 70 years. Part of how we read the fossil record now depends on living dinosaurs. Birds are the only surviving theropod lineage, and their behavior is directly relevant. Ostrich brooding posture is virtually identical to Citipati's preserved pose. The raptor prey restraint model was derived from studying modern hawks and eagles. Komodo dragons replicate the competitive feeding seen at Deinonychus Tenontosaurus sites. Herons choke on oversized fish, the same failure mode as Compsognathus 150 million years later. Phylogenetic bracketing provides the logic. If a behavior exists in both crocodilians and birds, it likely existed in dinosaurs between them. These 10 stories span 150 million years in every scale, from a 2-kilogram predator choking on a lizard to every non-avian species erased by an asteroid. The same forces, gravity, momentum, sediment dynamics, still govern every living thing today. The fossil record does not preserve caution, it preserves failure. These are not stories of poor design, but of exquisitely adapted animals pushed one step past their operating parameters. The same code that built 57,000 Newton jaws built arms too short to break a fall. Modern elephants mire in mud. Hawks choke on prey. Herds stampede into rivers. 66 million years of additional evolution has not solved these problems. Evolution is not a march toward perfection. It is a negotiation with physical reality. The laws of nature do not negotiate and do not care about 160 million years of precedent. They simply apply.